Wow, praise the Lord, huh? Welcome everybody watching online as well. I know every week we have some people watching the messages from Westbrook Online. I don't know the exact number, but we have some regular, kind of long-distance attenders, so can we give a big shout-out to them today as well? We welcome you. And we've talked about this a little bit. We're working on live streaming our services. That's why there's been some lighting changes to our auditorium here, and you're like, what's going on with all that? That's why we're doing all these things. It's one of our long-held values at Westbrook, all right? It's the church. The church needs to be culturally relevant. Thus, if we're going to reach our area for Christ and reach our culture for Christ, then we'd better keep up to date technologically, right? And we're along the way, but we still have a long ways to go. And so I'd like to give kudos to our production team and our production people. Can we just thank the Lord for them as well? And they've been working so hard with all of these adjustments. Thank you for your patience with all of this and with all these adjustments and so forth along the way. Let me just remind you that all the things that we do around here is for the sake of the gospel and for the sake of spreading the word. And so just always remember that. Anyway, welcome to Westbrook. We're glad you're here. Grab your Bibles, if you will, and grab your programs, if you will. Open up your outlines. This morning, I want to begin a brand new series of messages today entitled Reclaimed. Reclaimed. Did you say this with me on the count of three? 1, 2, 3. Reclaimed. That's what we're going to be talking about the next bunch of weeks. This idea of broken and discarded things being reclaimed. That is a popular thing these days. You know what I'm talking about. There are TV shows. They're really popular. People who go garbage picking or dumpster diving. They find these old, discarded treasures, and either they take the pieces and the parts and they make them new again, or they take them and they retool them into something totally different. And I'm not an artisan by any stretch of the imagination, but I am enamored by these people who can take old, worn out, rusted out, banged out vehicles, pickup trucks or whatever, and they can breathe new life into them. I think it's fabulous. They see potential in the bones of the truck or in the bones of the house, and they restore it to the way that it first was, or they restore it into something even more incredible. When I was a kid, my dad at the greenhouse had this old 1945 Ford pickup truck. It looked real similar to that. It wasn't that one, but it was really similar, all right? And this was the first vehicle that I learned how to drive on. And 8, 9, 10 years old, it wasn't a road truck. We just kept it around the greenhouse and around the property, and we would drive it around, and we would drive it through the gardens, and we would drive it down the lanes, and we would do the work around the greenhouse. We'd maybe pick a truckload of sweet corn, and we'd pull it up to the back door, and we'd shuck the whole truckload of sweet corn, and my mom would freeze it. You know, we had a vegetable freezer and a fruit freezer and a meat freezer all in our basement. All this stuff that she had canned. And we'd call that classic truck, real similar to this one, we called it the Red Baron. I don't know where we came up with that name, but we called it the Red Baron. And I remember as an 8, 9, 10-year-old kid sitting in that truck, driving that old truck. It was a 3 on the tree. Some of you old-timers know what I'm talking about with that, a 3 on the tree. And thinking someday, one of these days, I'm going to restore this old thing. As if I had any idea how to do that, other than it would be really cool to have. But the Red Baron was a wonderful thing that I would love to reclaim. Well, the Red Baron was parked on the edge of my dad's apple orchard for years, and when I was in college, some guy offered him a wad of cash, no doubt, and we lost it. But I remember thinking, the feeling of wanting to reclaim this sweet old thing. Christy and I love watching those HGTV shows. You know what I'm talking about, where they take these gaudy 1970s style houses. Why would anybody want a house like that? They were cool back in the 70s, back in the Brady Bunch days, yes? And they reclaimed these 1970 houses and they turned them into modern family homes, right? With vaulted ceilings and open concept sight lines and showcase kitchens and replaced, or the pink bathroom fixtures and the garish wallpaper. The house gets reclaimed. Well, listen to me. If artisans and mechanics can do that to our beat up, rusted out, junked out, archaic, and outdated property, then I want to talk about how the master artisan and the master mechanic, God, can do that to our lives. He can do that to our lives. And I want to talk about it because there's a lot of people, a lot of you, even in this service, a lot of you walking around in our world today, a lot of you even in our church today, where you're thinking to yourself, I'm too damaged, I'm too used up, I'm too rusted out in spots, I'm too hurt, I'm too outdated, it's too much to be used by God, ever to have the hope of healing and redemption. It's just not going to happen. Because here's what's going on. People have endured years and years of abuse and decades of mental health struggles and a lifetime of pain. And they begin to think after all of this, year after year after year, that that is their lot in life and nothing is going to change. Nothing is going to change. They think there's no hope of healing, there's no hope of change, there's no hope of reclamation. Well, I want to arm wrestle you on that thought for a little bit today. I want to arm wrestle you on that because even though some of the parts of your life may seem worthy of the scrap heap, pain and anxiety and abuse and family strife, we become ashamed of what seems ugly and hopeless. But I want you to look up here. We become ashamed of all that, but God has a different perspective. You catch me? He has a different perspective. Believe it or not, God is a dumpster diver who knows what to look for in our failures, and He sees the beauty. He sees the beauty in what's damaged and broken. And through His power and through His grace, He grabs stuff and he can take it that seems useless and He reclaims it for His amazing purposes. So the question of the day is, what part of you needs to be reclaimed? I got a friend who hears me talk about this all the time, and I'm constantly trying to encourage this person about God's grace and God's ability to change us, right? And yet all I hear back from him is God can't use me. I'm too far gone. God could never use me. I'm beyond repair. I'm useless. I hate my family. I'm not so sure I even like myself. I keep trying to impress upon that person that person, that type of person is exactly the type of person that God specializes in. He specializes in people who think they're just too far gone. And there's a lot of people like my friend who are abused and depressed and broken and rusted out and used up, and they feel like there's no hope. Well, in this series that we're beginning today, and we're going to kind of be preaching this series as we build up to Easter, I want to talk about how we can be reclaimed. And I want to encourage you, if maybe even already, some of this sermon already, we've just started, you can begin to identify with and relate to. I want to encourage you to be with us every single week throughout this series. And I want to encourage you to invite your family and your friends and your loved ones to be with us over the next bunch of weeks, because we're going to talk about several issues, sadly, all too common issues of hopelessness. So many people are way too familiar with the pain of life and the pain of the nagging residue of a painful life. God can reclaim us. God can take that pain, whatever it is, and whoever brought it to us, and He can use it for His glory. Goodness, I could tell you story after story after story of how God changed people's lives. And we could look at so many different Bible stories of how God changed lives and how we could highlight this. In fact, this one particular one we're going to look at today, it's a kind of a famous story in the Old Testament about a guy by the name of Joseph. Do you remember Joseph, the story of Joseph? Joseph was the youngest son of a bunch of brothers of an old guy by the name of Jacob. Jacob loved his youngest son, Joseph. He doted on him. He seemed to give him a preferential treatment to the point that it made his other brothers super jealous. They got tired of their dad always treating him with the special treatment, right? They got envious of him, And when they had had enough of him, they had had enough of his dreams, they had had enough of his special treatment, they turned mean and they turned evil, and they devised a plan. If you know the story, they devised a plan where they were going to throw him in a pit and they were going to let him die. How's that for being deceived? How's that for being betrayed, right? Instead, they decided to make some money on him. And they sold him as a slave to a traveling caravan of merchants. Can you imagine the horror and the deceit and the betrayal that Joseph felt? Can you just imagine how he felt through all that? And not long after that, the merchants then sold him to a government official in the next country over, where he became a slave and a house servant. And so here he is, alone in a strange land with strange people, with a strange job, trying to deal with all this strange, unique stuff in his life. You can read Genesis chapter 37. I'd love for you to read his story. Jot that verse down. Genesis chapter 37 and the next bunch of chapters following that. Read his story. Read the story. But what you're going to find is this. You're going to find a young guy who is no doubt confused and deceived and lonely and abused. Can you imagine his guy, right? When he's finally able to lay his head down at night to get some sleep, he looks up at the stars wondering what in the world happened to him and how long will this last and when would this nightmare be over? But as the days turned into weeks and turned into months, there was something about Joseph that he had no doubt in his spirit that God was with him. He had this sense in him that God was with him. You see, he began to gain favor from his boss, the story goes. And he got to the point in the house, he was kind of second in command of the house, and until out of the blue, the boss's wife accused him of rape, and he was instantly thrown into prison to rot and to die in the pit again. Again. But God was with him. And then he began to gain favor with the prison warden. And to make a long, incredibly fascinating story short, sometime later he got out of prison. He began working for the Pharaoh. He was elevated to second in command. And all along the way, in the midst of all this craziness, God was with him. And all along, Joseph kept his heart focused on God. And he kept his heart focused on doing good, even to the point of saving his father and his brothers in the end. In God's perfect oversight. Listen to me. In God's perfect oversight, He took all of these painful trials and bitter disappointments that on their own left a bad taste in His mouth, and God mixed them all together, and He brought something sweet in the end. He reclaimed Joseph. One of our family favorites at our house that Christy makes is cinnamon coffee cake. I don't know where she got the recipe many, many years ago when our boys were much younger, but it's become a longtime favorite of our boys at special occasions, especially on the morning of their birthday. She would make it the night before, and when they woke up and they would come downstairs, there was the red "You Are Special" plate, you know what I'm talking about, and there was the coffee cake every single year for their birthday. And I don't know all of the ingredients that go into cinnamon coffee cake. I don't help her make it, I just help them eat it. But I know that when she puts it all together and she bakes it to perfection, it is definitely a house favorite. But we can't enjoy it, you see, until she puts it all together and creates it like it's supposed to be created. And I don't know for certain, but my guess is it's got a stick or two of butter. I mean, everything that's really tasty's got butter in it, right? And I've never done this before. Maybe you have, but have you ever taken a stick of butter and you opened up the whole thing and you just grab a hold of it and you go, just bite into a stick? Anybody here just bit into a stick of butter? Some of you have. All right. Interesting. Tell me how that worked for you, all right? You know, you're not going to take a stick of butter and bite into a stick of butter, right? It would be gross. And a large spoonful of sour cream right out of the tub would make anyone gag. And I don't regularly shove a heaping handful of flour in my mouth and walk around the kitchen. And I don't put a quarter cup of cinnamon. That would be super bitter. But when they're all blended together and they're blended and they're baked by the loving artisan, are you tracking me here? When they're all blended together and baked by the artisan, all these ingredients by themselves are bad. But when they're mixed together and when they're baked for just the right amount of time, Christy has created something incredibly good. That's how God works. That's how God works. God can take the stuff of our life, stuff that we go through, some of the stuff that we go through, let's just be honest, some of the stuff that we go through is our own fault. It's just natural consequences of the boneheaded decisions that we have made and we know we shouldn't have made them. Sometimes it is absolutely our fault, and it's the consequences of our own decisions. But He takes that painful stuff. Sometimes the painful stuff that we're dealing with in our lives is stuff that happened to us by evil people and evil intentions, things that have been done to us, not by any fault of our own. Evil deeds done by angry, hurt, wicked, immoral people. But He can take the confusion of our hurting minds and our hurting hearts and our hurting psyche, and when we give it to Him, He can make something beautiful out of that. He can take the stuff that just seems to constantly cycle back in our life, and in the end, He can use it for His glory and good. Maybe some of the pain that you're dealing with, some of the stuff that you're dealing with, betrayal that you're dealing with, maybe it's different. I don't know. But the cyclical nature of it hurts the same. But God can take all that stuff that just cycles back to us over and over and over again, and in the end, He can make something good and for His glory. In fact, I want you to write down some words. I think they're printed for you in your program. I want you to get these words down. Maybe a couple phrases here that you can hang on to when you're in pain. Here's the first one. Ready for this? God is at work in all things. He is at work in your thing. Did you catch me? God is at work in all things. He is at work in your thing. When Joseph's story had come nearly full circle, when God redeemed his life and He used Joseph to redeem his family's lives, Joseph was able to say these words. Genesis chapter 50, verse 20, he said, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." That's a powerful verse. But I think that there's two really powerful words in this powerful verse. You might want to underline this in your Bible. It's these two words, but God. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Pain, everything can be reclaimed by God, for God. God is at work in all things. He is at work in your thing. And God wants to use your pain for His healing in your life and redemption for His purposes. Do you believe that? I talk a lot in my preaching about a guy by the name of the Apostle Paul in the New Testament. And the Apostle Paul, he says that he was given a gift. I think that's an interesting phrase that he used. He was given this gift, and in reality, it was really a trial. He also, in other places, called it his thorn in the flesh. We don't really know exactly what it was. It was something that burdened him, or bothered him, or weighed him down, or gave him physical pain. But in the end, he realized that God had a purpose for his pain. And as a result of that, he was able to write. He wrote these words. He says, 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. But He said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Look up here. God took that which was meant to torment him to transform him. God took that which was meant to torment him to transform him. And listen to me real carefully, my friends. I'm not saying that your abuse was a gift. No. Just the opposite. Your peace was robbed. Your body was violated. Your spirit was crushed. What I'm saying is that which can torment you can somehow be used by God to transform you. And so let me leave you with a couple of key words. If you want to be reclaimed, here's the first word. Write this one down. Surrender. Surrender your pain. Surrender your pain, because if you try to hide it or handle it or manage it by yourself, you're just going to get bitter, not better. But if you surrender your pain into the hands and the ability of the master craftsman, who knows what can happen? And instead, in the middle of the pain, you're praising Him, you're trusting Him, you're worshiping His name. You're not going to be like, well, God's not doing what I want, and so I'm mad at Him, and I'm not going to come to church anymore. No. If you do that, you're missing the point. You're missing what can happen. You're not getting it. That's not how it works. When you're going through pain, you press into God. You don't run away from God. You press into Him. You surrender your pain to God. And when you surrender your pain to God, get honest with God. Talk honestly to Him, right? Tell Him, like, God, I don't like this. I don't understand it. I want it to stop. I've had enough of this. I don't get your plan in the midst of all this pain. You got to let me in the midst of all this. I don't know what God is going to do, but here's what I know for sure. God is at work, and the devil's not going to get the last word on this one, and I'm going to surrender to the pain, and I'm going to surrender the pain to God. What pain do you need to surrender to God? Around Westbrook right now, we got a bunch of babies coming. We got a bunch of pregnant women at our church. And several babies, one or two have already been born. A bunch of them are on the way. Our baby, he was here last service. He turned 20 last month. Now, I've never had a baby. Christy's had 3 of them. I have passed a kidney stone, and they say that that's comparable to passing a baby. But I am smart enough not to compare my pain to that pain, because I'll get flooded with a bunch of emails. But they say that having a baby is the worst pain ever. Anybody here, you know what I'm talking about? The worst pain ever? Worst pain ever? I heard someone say that having a baby is like taking your lower lip and stretching it up over your head while somebody says, would you like some more ice chips? It's painful. It's hard, it's scary, it's risky. The baby could die, and the mother could die, the father could die, because in labor the mother shouts, you did this to me! And if I ever make it out of this alive, you're never touching me again. Because in the middle of this, the pain, it hurts so bad. It hurts so bad, doesn't it? But when the baby is born, and the pain comes out, right? And they cut the cord and they place that slimy little infant on the mother's chest. And that little cute little baby, and she looks up and she opens up her eyes and she looks at you and she looks at mama, and then a day or two later they dress her up real pretty and they take her home, and she starts to grow and she starts to coo and she starts to crawl, and she brings joy into your life like you've never imagined, and she starts to grow and she starts to kind of develop who she is, and you begin to think, you got dreams for her and you got special things for her, Right out of the blue, the wife walks up to the husband and says, baby, maybe we ought to think about this again. The Bible says that Jesus, for the joy set before Him, He endured the cross. He endured the pain for the joy that He could see at the end of the process, and the joy past the delivery. Listen to me, friends. We've got to remember that in the middle of some of our worst stuff, that God can birth some of His best stuff. And so as you're struggling, and as you say, I don't want to do this anymore. The contractions are killing me. And you think you're going to die. But you just keep pushing and trusting and breathing and believing that for the joy set before you, you can get through this. And God is going to birth something through this pain. And so let me just ask you, what pain do you need to surrender to God that He can produce something out of it? If you're holding it or hiding it or handling it, you're not surrendering it. Here's the second word. Remember. Remember where this is going. Remember where all this is going. And here's what I mean by that. God has a big old plan, all right? He has a big old plan, and it's not just to reclaim your personal private pain, but it's bigger than just you and me. Listen to me. It's bigger than just you and me. God has this cosmic, universal, far-reaching reclamation plan that is already underway, moving us to a new heaven and a new earth, making all things new. Listen, He's not just reclaiming your life or my life, but He's reclaiming all of our lives for all eternity, the whole world. He's reclaiming this whole aching planet, the whole groaning earth. God has a master plan to take this whole entire sin-infested, painful, sin-broken world that seems to be destined for the dump heap. And He's like, no. I'm going to bring this place around. I'm going to make it new. And He, like that, can make your life new as well. He can reclaim you. He can take it all, and He can make it brand new. John said in Revelation 21, he said, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, 'Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and He will dwell with them. They will be His people, and God will Himself will be with them and be their God, and He will wipe away every tear from their eye, and there will be no more death, nor mourning, or crying, or pain.'" The one who sits on the throne, that fantastic artisan and craftsman, says, "See, I am making all things new. I am making all things new. I'm a reclaimer. I'm a dumpster diver. He's baking a big old cake, and I don't know how He does it. And I don't know why He does it. But He takes all of these ingredients that are left on their own are bitter, and He can put it all together, and He can make something sweet. And you got to know that, my friends, and you got to remember that, and that which you're struggling with in the addiction that you're going through, if you surrender it to God again and again and again and again, He can take that and He can make that something new. And I know, remembering that may not take away your pain in the moment, but it might bring some perspective for you to endure it. You've got to remember where this whole thing is going. And if you surrender your pain to God and remember that somehow God has a plan, it might change the way you look at your pain. God is reclaiming everything. Let Him have the broken pieces of your life and make you new. That's our God.